Welcome to The Best Medicine. I'm your host, Dr. Bradley H. Werrell, and we're here to explore options and potentials to help us grow as individuals and as a community with one another in these difficult times and challenging times. We're exploring all manner of potentials related to the human experience: physical, psychological, medical, spiritual. It's a wonderful opportunity that we now experience in this critical phase of our human evolution. And I welcome you to join us in our podcast, become more aware, and identify with people who are helpful and supportive of you in your efforts as a human being on this planet and elsewhere too. We're going to be meeting people who are doing things that are widely variant from what is so-called normal within our society, in the creative space, within the social space. Our common purpose, seeking to generate positive potentials to improve the lives of everyone in our sphere of influence, and to expand that sphere of influence so that we may positively influence others that are not yet engaged directly with us. That's the goal here. We will learn more about each other as we go. I wish you the very best. Thank you very much for tuning in. To record.
Hey.
All right, so we have Rhachel Toombs. Rachel, R-H-A-C-H-E-L, her creative parents. I run into a fair amount of that in my work as a family practice guy. I like creative people. Like, what are your parents thinking, man? You're spelling a name in such a fashion that causes everybody to go, what does that mean? How do you say that, right? It's like, imagine you run into that a little bit.
Oh yeah. Well, what I tell people is that my parents were sociopaths. There's actually because everyone I have two younger brothers and they're both RH as well. And so I think there was a study that came out a few years ago that people who name their children with the same letter actually have sociopathic tendencies. So I typically just say, oh yeah, they're sociopaths, and I get a laugh and we move on. So
there you go. That's an interesting thing because you like confuse the names of your children when you're upset.
Oh, sure.
Especially if they all start with the same letters. I'm sure they were calling everybody's name out when they were upset with one of you.
Oh, of course. Yeah. I think so I used to be a teacher and I used to work with parents as a parenting consultant as well. And so I think a lot of parents have that problem, but it makes it way more difficult when you all begin with the same letter. And my mother's name was Rhonda, and my father's name was Ralph. So, and then they would name all our family pets with the first letter R as well. It was,
Oh my.
I know. I know. It's kind of crazy. I will admit that.
There you go. So I hope you will be so kind as to tell the audience a little bit about your background.
Yeah. So I thought I was going to be an orchestral conductor. I went to school for music and I got in with violin. I've been playing violin since I was 5. And I went to Rollins College, which is a small liberal art college here in Florida. It's in Winter Park, Florida. And I got some scholarships for violin. That's how I got in. And I went there because I could study orchestral conducting as an undergrad. Typically, you don't get that kind of treatment as an undergrad. You don't get to do that. And about my second year in, I thought, you guys are kind of crazy in the music department. Like, you guys are kind of nuts. And I didn't see a future in it for me just because I knew that my ability to become a conductor would be very limited. There's not a lot of demand for orchestral conductors, and it's typically very competitive. So rather than like switch schools or switch majors and lose my scholarship, I thought, I'll just go ahead and get my degree in music, and then I'll try different jobs, see what I like, maybe go back to grad school and get, in a topic that I really care about. And not that I don't care about music, it was just one of those things that I did. So then I got out and I became a teacher at a small local Christian school. I taught music and math. I didn't really get along with the principal very well. So in less than a year, I ended up leaving there. And I actually went and taught English in China. I had some friends who had taught English in China, and they would go on and on about what a life-changing experience it was. So I said, okay, I guess I'll just go with this group of strangers to China, and I'll teach English, and I'll just live in China for a year. And that was really interesting. Life changing experience for me. It really was. Um, just because I really hadn't thought much about politics up that point. I mean, I grew up in a very partisan kind of family where, you vote a certain way, you believe a certain thing, you don't really question it. Um, and so I just never questioned it, and I never really understood it. I really wasn't into economics. I really just, I didn't understand healthcare. I didn't really understand anything. It just wasn't an interest of mine, and I was never taught it. So when I went to China, I mean, I knew they were a communist country, but I didn't really understand communism either. And so I went there and it was just eye opening. And I began to question everything, really dive into economics and political science, and try to find my own identity politically. And I really started questioning the political parties, which was kind of uncomfortable having grown up in a staunch partisan family, and really taught to not question them and not really look under the hood. And from there, I kind of formed my own political values and my own values at large. And I actually had wanted to stay in China to teach English, but I came back home to be with my family, and I've been in the U.S. ever since. I took some teaching jobs, and I became a full-time nanny and a parenting consultant as well. And when I came back to the US, I knew that I wanted to fight for freedom and fight for liberty. I was really, really terrified that what was happening in China would happen here. And this was right before the Affordable Care Act came into play. I
So
came
what
back
year are we
right
at? What year is that?
This was in 2010. That was the year that the Affordable Care Act, or like that was around the time, like right before, right?
I don't recall. I just go like this is like, I was politically active in 2007, 2008. Yeah,
Okay.
after that. So that's about right though. It's like somewhere in that time range. It was after that election.
Yeah, it was in Obama's second year. I came back after his first year and a half, June 2010. Um, so yeah, it was right before that. And I started going to political party meetings thinking, okay, this is where I can find my home, other people that really care about politics and hopefully they care about facts. And I wanted to
Mhm.
learn more too and see how I could get involved and see how I could fight for freedom. And what I found in the political parties was a lot of hypocrisy. They always say principle over politics. That wasn't true at all. And I ended up joining the Libertarian Party, and in 2016, I really got involved with the Libertarian Party. And I realized that they're still a party. You say principle over politics, it still just wasn't there because in politics, especially with the political party, the whole point is get in office, stay in office. And you do that at almost any cost. That's just power. And so I didn't really like that. So I thought, well, I'm going to try to stick to the issues. And I want to find an organization, and I want to go into politics full time in some capacity, but fight for principle, fight for issues, not fight based on party lines. So I went to Americans for Prosperity, and I did organizational work and advocacy work in the field for them for about a year and a half. Then their educational wing, their training wing, picked me up, and I started traveling all over the US, teaching activists, training them on different issues, training them how to be better organizers and how to fight for what they believe in. And now I'm at America's Future as the director of grassroots and community growth
How long you been doing that?
since January 2nd of this year. So
Is it
it's
similar program? You're helping people become more effective organizers and field workers.
so it's actually kind of different. I like to call America's Future the culture and lifestyle branch of the liberty movement. We really focus on educating and empowering millennials and Gen Zers who are mostly aligned with us to get active in some way, whether that's writing an op-ed or going to City Hall or joining a C4 nonprofit organization where they actually can do direct political advocacy or grassroots advocacy, starting a book club, just living a lifestyle based on liberty so that they're a good testimony for our values and our principles.
Yeah, it seems to me the interesting function that it is what we are this kind of nexus we've arrived at is that we're forced to choose between participation in systems that are necessarily disempowering to the individual for, you could say systemic oppression of everybody to generate some value for some few people at the other end of the narrowing funnel that sucks up all the wealth, or its power and centralization of authority and power, and the finance is not the big part of it. People like there are very many people in this country, they think that it's all about money, and the wealthy people want money. No, money doesn't matter. They just want power. It's like
Right,
control.
right.
And it's like, okay, so it's like, to me, the key function is our attention and our intention and our participation in systems that don't work for us but work on us. And so it's like, so to me, it's like grassroots movement is to figure out how to organize outside of the control of these institutions, is kind of how I see it.
Yeah, the way I really describe it is grassroots activism and advocacy. The aim is to hold those institutions accountable. And I think that's where we're really seeing a huge failing in the US is people say, okay, it's team red against team blue. And if you're on team red or you're on team blue, then you're automatically against anything and everything the other team stands for. It doesn't really matter if your team's right or wrong, or sometimes right, sometimes wrong. It's we have to win at all costs, even if we're dishonest about it. And so the I mean, I really see it as a partisanship problem. And then the institutions kind of are divvied up like that. I also see a huge cultural problem, and I think the Marxist movement has done a really great job of shifting culture. I think we've seen that this year more than any other year, is that they've been working so long on changing hearts and minds that they were really able to leverage different opportunities of events that happened this year to really shift people's view on things like racism, um, and a variety of other things, including the proper role of government. And so I think that's a huge problem too. Us in the liberty movement, we're really good at winning political battles and getting candidates elected to office. And that's pretty much what most organizations in the liberty movement focus on. But there's really a gap. And the gap is we're not actually changing hearts and minds. We're not fighting the cultural war. And as we know, I mean, policy is downstream from culture. A great example of that is the temperance movement. You had the 18th Amendment, banning alcohol, right? But it only stuck around for a few years. And the reason why is because the culture didn't shift. They were able to make that huge policy win, but without the culture, it's not going to stay. So we can win all the policy that we want, but if we're not changing hearts and minds, if we're not shifting culture, then it's just not going to stick.
Right. No, the interesting thing about that is it's like that goes to Antonio Gramsci, the Italian Marxist who wrote about cultural hegemony. He died in 1937, and he pretty much stated what has happened, which is he called the battle plan, which is to the cultural hegemony is the I would define it as the cultural preferences of the elite are projected through the social institutions into the general public. And
Hmm.
so he posited this battle plan, which is first we have a war of position, which is we put our guys into the social institutions so they can be the elite that are then going to influence everybody else. And it's like and then that is necessary to create the social conditions necessary for the revolution, because they're Marxist revolutionary. And then we will have the kinetic fight, which is actual combat with the forces of reaction against the revolution. So it's
Mm.
like they tried it in 1969, 1970 with the Weather Underground. Those guys thought they were going to spark the revolution in America. And
Mm.
it's like it wasn't time. And it's like that's what this looks like. And the interesting thing about it is it's like the the institutions have all been infiltrated and have all been are all pushing in the same direction. So it's like
Yeah.
so the cultural preferences of the elite is the revolutionary. Those guys are the those are the elite, And it is like what has happened is interesting is that they have created conditions of necessary for evolution, but that's where we get the reaction of the 2016 election,
Mm-hmm.
which is
Oh,
that
oh, of course. Yeah.
you're pushing us in a direction we don't want to be pushed, and it's like wow, it's like the spring back is populism, nationalism, and
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
that's what I see has happened in the what's that mean? It's like it is. It's the issue is this is that the control of the educational process was it's a long-standing plan for all the people who are trying to control the populace, to control the minds of the youth. Because it's like there was a story that was fascinating to me that was the teachers are doing this telecommunication systems over conferences like we're having this little chat
Yeah.
with the students, and they're told the parents they didn't want the parents eavesdropping in on what they're teaching the kids. And I'm like, wow, that's crazy, Bill. But it's like
Yeah.
doesn't surprise me really after
Mm-mm.
having witnessed some of the things that are being espoused in these institutions.
Yeah, I mean, I was really fortunate. I was homeschooled from kindergarten to 8th grade. And then in ninth and 10th grade, I went to a one-room schoolhouse. And then 11th grade, I went to a public school, but it was a public art school because I played violin. Um, and I mean, you had to interview to get in. So, I mean, it was a higher level kind of student, and the teachers were amazing, but, and I don't like, they didn't really have a political agenda. However, the education was just so poor that it's like, these kids couldn't think for themselves to save their life. Like they just couldn't think for themselves. They couldn't even follow basic instructions to write an essay. At that point, I had never really written too many essays being homeschooled. Like it was mostly just reading and a few tests and stuff. I really didn't write essays. I don't know. That was just the style of my parents. Um, so like I wasn't like a huge essay writer when I went to public school in 11th grade, but I remember I was one of only 3 students who actually got 100 on our first essay of the year. And it wasn't because my essay was like incredibly good or anything. It was just I followed the instructions. Like you have to have this many paragraphs, you have to have this many words, it has to address these 3 things. Okay, fine. Like it was, not a whole lot of room for creativity, but I don't care. I just want the grade, right? But the students couldn't even do that. And I remember, I think the most political thing was, it wasn't even overtly political for the sake of, politics, but I remember sitting in environmental science, wonderful teacher, but she kept going on and on and on about how, like the environment can't take this many people and something's got to give, and it's like, well, what are you actually saying here, ma'am? And I don't think people really caught on to that. I mean, it was months and months of this kind of talk and about, I mean, it was just, yeah, it was not a great experience. And I mean, I think that was actually one of the better schools in my county. And I mean, yeah, it's just not good. I mean, even if they're not teaching overt political positions or Marxism, which we know that's not true. We know that's happening in a lot of schools. Um, I mean, even still, they're not teaching kids how to think, So when they go out into the real world, they're just going to go along with what the political parties and the politicians and the propaganda and the media, whatever they say, or whoever's the most popular in Hollywood, what they say. And I mean, I agree with you. They've infiltrated education system. They've infiltrated the media. They've infiltrated Hollywood. I mean, I think it was Clark Gable and Ronald Reagan. There was actually like a conservative Republican club or something, like, and I mean, now, I mean, look at Hollywood. I mean, I think recently, like they were flaming Chris Pratt on Twitter for being conservative. And calling him a Trumper and stuff. I don't even actually know if he is a Trumper or not, but it's just, it's really sad. It's not a good situation.
Well, it's interesting because I was kind of a black sheepy kind of school person, and the and I studied. I got real mad. I graduated from college in '85, and then I was bouncing around trying to figure out what to do for about 10 years. Then I went to medical school, and then
Mhm.
when I was done with medical school, after my internship, I worked for a couple of years as a general practice guy before I did my residency, and my stepdaughter brought home a book that was about the monetary system, which I read, and I'm like, she didn't couldn't tolerate it, but I read it, and I'm like, made me so irritatedly mad because I understood what a dollar was after having gone to a famous liberal arts college and paid top dollars and did what they said and was a good boy and graduated with what I thought would minimally qualify me to enter into civil society. But then I'm like this. I'm like, I'm going to sue these people
Yeah.
because it goes like this. It took me 16 years, and only accidentally did I figure out what a dollar was. And I'm like, so it's like this. I pay you the big bucks. I do what you say. I and then I graduate, and I did the discipline. But it's like this: you didn't make me minimally qualified to enter into civil society because
Mm.
I don't understand what a dollar is for 16 years, and a dollar is in every contract that I could sign, which means I don't understand the basic terms of the contract. I'm not qualified to even sign the thing. And I'm like,
Yeah.
out of the park. And
Oh, yeah.
that began my educational process, which is like, I better figure out what's going on here. That was in 2002. I started that process.
Oh, wow.
And I just recently, so I studied finance. What's going on? How does this money thing work and all the financial things? And I studied most recently. We bought a private practice here. My buddy from residency, we moved our families out here to Arizona and purchased private practice and tried to make that work. Two doctors to make a private practice work, and it's like can't be done systemically. The system says that is not what we want, so they squeeze us out. We
Yeah, yeah.
figured it out when we couldn't make any money, and then we end up selling it to the hospital. Hospital gets paid 3.5 times what they're willing to pay us, so there's no market. That was the
Yeah.
illusion that we believed. That we believed there was a free market in medicine. It's like no, no,
Ah,
no. It's a command economy. I'm like, wow,
yeah.
wow, that just blow. You can't even imagine it because they're willing to pay 3.5 times to somebody who's not you.
Yeah.
And I'm like, unbelievable. So it's like, but that's the educational process I did. So I spent the last 4 years just trying to figure out what happened to America and studying. No,
Oh,
oh, it's a terrible story. It's a terrible.
oh,
No,
that's so
no.
uncomfortable.
My father is a retired history professor, recent American history, and we
Oh,
cannot talk, not about that. Oh no,
really?
oh no.
Why not?
Well, I asked my dad this question. This is funny. I said, Dad, it occurs to me that if you believe what I'm saying, it has to do with the conspiracy theory. It does not matter how much evidence I bring to bear. Is that correct? He says, stunningly, yes. And I'm like, whoa, I can't believe you agreed to that, man. Right?
Yeah.
But it's okay. It's okay because I don't need him to agree with me. He's 82, right?
Yeah.
That's okay.
Wow. I think in my mind, I just automatically assume that former history teachers that are that old aren't, I mean, and I don't know what if your father is buying into a certain like revisionist kind of American history or understanding or anything. No.
He's a
Um,
straight shooter, man. He's like this. It's all about so what happened was about 1920,
mhm.
and prior to that, 1910, the Carnegie Foundation was talking about what do they need to do to change the American people, right? There's evidence of this in a Reese committee, which was a congressional committee on is when they were doing the un-American activities things, and it was the Reese committee was studying the influence of the tax exempt foundations. And they're like this: the tax exempt foundations reforged American history and changed the rules by which history was taught and understood. And they changed it in a manner so that guys like my dad will not recognize evidence that is not within the standards of what they called evidence. So it's like
Mm.
it's to codify the production of history so that we can control history for the purpose of controlling the public narrative. Does that make sense?
Yeah, oh, 100%. It reminds me of what they've done to the science industry in this country as well. I don't know if you ever, and I'm no expert in science or history. I just want to say that like my expertise lays in music and organizing, and that's pretty much where my, and then maybe some cooking. I'm a pretty good cook. I know a lot about that, but um I watched this documentary called Expelled. Ben Stein did it. He did it, oh, it's over 10 years old now. I remember it came out when I was actually taking human evolution in college. That was like in '06 or something. And it came out, and you can barely even find it anymore. It's like you can't find it anywhere because the stuff in it is just so shocking. Like mainstream would never, they don't want it out there. But basically it shows like how there's a huge bias in the science community, how it's not, as a scientist you're not allowed to just do experiments, make hypotheses, and then whatever happens. Like it's really, really super biased, and if your findings don't fit in with a certain narrative that the scientific community has deemed appropriate, then you're pretty much blackballed.
Same as
um
history. History's the same. So it's like
yeah,
if you espouse views that are unpopular and it's like politically unacceptable, so it's like a form of self-censorship takes hold. But
interesting.
the interesting finding was, in my further research on these tax exempt foundations, what they did was they control the grant writing process and the granting process, and therefore they can control the direction of research. And
Interesting.
so my conclusion became this, which is like, so what looks like meritocracy is not, which is
Hmm.
school is a meritocracy. I'm like, no, it's a social promotion scheme, which is
Yeah.
if we like you, we pat you on the back and you're attaboy, you're great. And then we'll give you a scholarship and promote you. And guys like me, I'm a hard headed guy that I'm not agreeable enough, man. I just will not go along and get along. And I'm like, and I'll get knocked in the head and until I'm discouraged sufficiently because I'm like, you guys are corrupt, rotten, and I'll go figure out something better to do, which is like, okay, that's what I'm good at. And it's like, that's how
Yeah.
come we end up talking because it's
Right,
like
right.
this. I call this bitter pill I have to eat. So as a physician, so I'm working for the hospital and I'm using a electronic health record, which is not working for me or the patient, but working on both of us as I
Yeah.
report information on both of us to people that neither one of us knows nor care what they do, except they're going to use it against both of us in some fashion. Okay.
Yeah.
And I call this is a bitter pill I eat every day. This side is extremely irritating, and this side is sublimely motivating. And it's
Yeah.
like this, because it's like, what are you going to do about it, big boy? That's the only question, right?
Yeah.
And so that's how I end up doing what I where so this podcast is part and parcel of my interest in generating a two-step process. First of all, I'm working as the seed is to create a online telemedicine service for cash only. So we've cut away all the middleman, and
Awesome.
then we do what's essential to help the patient, and then we drastically diminish the costs. So and I want to make a nationwide system. There's something like 27 million uninsured Americans at this time. And I'm like, well, those guys have to pay just outrageous sums to go see the physician to get a piece of paper. I'm like, well, that's just ridiculous. We can really do a lot better. And
Oh,
that
absolutely.
that service is supposed to act as the kind of like the nucleating point for a greater public good that I'm trying to generate, which I call res publica, which is this public thing, which
Mhm.
is designed to create positively generative systems to enhance the well-being of the people in general, as well as not just the participants, but to generate a field that it goes outside. You know what I mean?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
And so
There
that's go
I'm
ahead.
sorry. No, please go ahead and finish your thought.
No, that's all. I'm pretty good.
Oh, okay. I forget his name, but America's Future in Nashville, the chapter that we have in Nashville, um, the chapter leader there has a friend who is trying to do, I don't think it's I don't think he's trying to do it nationwide, but he is trying to do it at least in Nashville. He's trying to do something very similar. I am not sure if he's a physician, or I think he is a physician, but he's trying to do something very, very similar, especially now with COVID. Um, and I think this is going to sound wrong. Maybe I shouldn't say this, but I think, well, I'm not going to say it, but I'll say it a different way. I think COVID has given us a great opportunity to really roll back a lot of restrictions. What's
I understand what you're saying. So it's like this. What
it?
this fits into a wider schema that I was to discuss with you because you may find it interesting, which is
Yeah.
it occurs to me that what has happened is that everybody is becoming aware of the fact that much was promised by all the social institutions, of which not all will be delivered. And
So true.
everyone is going to take a short. And so it's like this, the music is ending. We're playing musical chairs, and I need a place to park. And it's like
Right.
everybody knows they're getting shorted. So it's like there's not enough chairs here. And so what has happened is the public is withdrawing their consent from participation because it's like we recognize it as corruption or something like that. And you lied to us, and you're lying to me now, and you're going to lie to me in the future, and you just are trying to do something else other than what you say you're trying to do, which is to help the people or whatever they say.
Yeah, yeah.
And the entire superstructure of the establishment is based upon the consent of the people. And when we withdraw our consent, the pieces start falling down. And
Mhm.
so the general situation, as far as I can tell, is that the liabilities and assets are forming together and coalescing into a seed, which is to fall into the hands of a receiver as the entire structure is reorganized and a new establishment is elaborated. The
Yeah.
most important function in that is that the who is the receiver controls the direction that the next thing grows,
Mhm.
and that's the most important function for the would-be elite. And
Right.
so, in a normal bankruptcy, like say you and me have a corporation that goes bankrupt, the court decides who gets the seed, the receiver of the seed that is to control the liabilities and assets of the defunct corporation. But this is civilizational and in fact global in its context, and it's like so the manifestations of what we're seeing. And I think that, and it's like this is pretty edgy stuff, so I apologize for being
No,
too.
no, you're good.
Right?
No,
Because like
please.
this, it's like the three things that I witnessed, and not all of them are this year, but all of them are coming. All of them are coming to bear this year, which is the climate change, Black Lives Matter, and the COVID-19 are all
Mhm.
coming from social institutions, which is authoritarian mindset. Who's paying for these things to be elaborated as a narrative in the public space, and the purpose is to control who is the receiver. And the receiver in this civilizational sense is politically defined, right?
Oh, of course.
There you have it. So it's like this. So all the rules are changing. It's like I've witnessed it. I've been doing that. I was doing the telemedicine as a way to pay for my defunct business for 4 years while I studied what happened to America. Okay, so it's like this, and the rules have been changed a lot, especially with the COVID-19 is like an accelerant on that process. And so it's like, but I say all the rules of all the institutions are in flux, and they're settling down into the seed. They're trying to settle down to coalesce into a different formation, and that's what we're trying to. It's like we're trying to figure out what's going on in this great big foggy night, right?
Oh, absolutely. And I think I I think COVID has given us a lot of opportunity to, especially with like telemedicine, and I forget the other thing. It's basically where, as a medical provider, you have to get permission from other medical providers in the area in order to practice. I forget what it's called. We actually just got rid of it in Florida about a year ago, thank God. But I think it's been a great opportunity to really innovate in that space and make it easier for people like you to do business. I do wonder what is going to happen with the election if certain people get into power, one way or the other. I really, excuse me, I wonder how it's going to shake out. If there will end up being more barriers or less barriers. I would think in a year with COVID where people are like, yeah, of course we should have telemedicine. Why didn't we have this 10 years ago or 5 years ago, whatever? Um, I would think that it would become more appealing and the government would be like, yeah, we need this because we don't want people physically being, interacting. Um, as well as some other really good healthcare reform, political reform or policy reform rather. But I really am concerned with the direction, the political direction, the cultural direction that our country is going in, that we might end up with more barriers. But I have no idea. I'm purely speculating.
And so it comes down to what the people will tolerate,
I
and
guess.
the issue is that how much they're willing to pay, right?
Mhm.
Because it's like, yeah, its cost will eventually the cost will become significant because it's like,
Well,
go ahead.
Have you heard of the Cloward Piven
Yes.
strategy?
I was trying to think of Piven's name today. I was like, Cloward. I'm like, I can't remember Piven's name.
They're married, right? Yeah, they were married sociologists
Oh,
and
wait,
political.
I thought you said sociopaths before.
Well, I think there's a I think they are sociopaths, just between you and me. I think they are because they're like, we'll make a system that's so burdensome, it'll just collapse. And then we'll be able to leverage that collapse to be like, see, we need universal health care. And I could see that happening. I mean, I think a lot of people culturally are ready for universal health care, or they're at least okay with it without even knowing what it is. And I think that that has also given Marxists in in this country an opportunity to be like, look, with COVID, universal health care. I was just I'm a part of this Marxist Facebook group where people, talk about things. It's all based here in my city, Jacksonville. There's all these different like Marxist organizers and they talk about things. And some of the issues I agree with them all about like, criminal justice reform. Most of the issues I don't because I'm not a Marxist, right? But they were talking a few months ago about, oh, look at Cuba. Look at how great Cuba is. Their response to COVID has been wonderful. Everyone's been tested. They have very low infection rates, like no one's getting infected and it's just so great. It's like, are you kidding me right now? Like you're actually like you're talking about how great communism is. Like one of them even sarcastically said in like the comment section, "Oh yeah, but communism is so bad, right? Like they're doing such a great job with their healthcare, but yet communism is so bad. It's like the boogeyman." Ooh, and it's like
The question I would ask a person like that is, why are you still here?
yeah, in America, I know, right? Like, what? That's the question I have too. Why don't you go to Russia? Why don't you go to China? Go to Cuba. Go to Venezuela. I mean, Bernie Sanders and all these
Like,
Hollywood people were like, "Oh, Venezuela's great. It's going to work out so great. Democratic socialism, whatever." And now
okay,
look at it. I mean,
it's
come
okay.
on.
I just try to remain calm, and it's like,
It's ridiculous.
it is okay. So it is like this is like so. The issue is education is huge, and I think you have to. So I'll go back to this thing I was saying, which is that I believe the educational system is social promotion for people who are politically like-minded, or so like they're like go along, get along people. That's who's promoted, and not people who get things done because they're not polite. They're not polite enough. The people who buck the system and are not polite enough get eliminated because they're just too rough on everybody's feelings, because it's like, well, you made everybody feel bad because you were over
Well, they won't
outperforming
toe
them.
the line, right? They won't toe the narrative, and you can't question the narrative, right? Like you can't question authority.
Well,
That's how I see it.
that's an interesting function, and it's like the free speech question comes to play, right? And it's like, wow, it's so basic. It's like, wow, we're having a discussion about free speech. That's quite fascinating. And then
Mhm.
it is authoritarianism. I've been having this conversation. Now you might find this amusing, which is like, the conversation goes like this, because I have my neighbor across the street. Actually, he sat next to me in medical school for 2 years, about 1,500 miles from here. And we had no, yeah, he just randomly moved across the street. I'm like, you must be kidding me, right?
Uh,
And so I sat next to him for 2 years, and he never agreed with me, and I never agreed with him. We had lively conversations about our disagreeable selves for years. And it's like the question I actually had sent him a text today, which is about this medical authoritarianism. So look, if we're having a scientific discussion, you and me, and we disagree with one another, at some point it stops being a scientific discussion because we agreed not to agree, and we're arguing with each other, but we're not changing our minds. And now I say, it sounds like this has become political, right? Because our biases are going to play in. You're still muted.
I know I'm still muted. I have 4 dogs, so I apologize. Sometimes they see someone across the street and they lose their minds.
Rabbit, or no, you would say squirrel.
Yeah, like, "Oh my god." Yeah, "Hey guys, cut it out." Yeah, no, it's all like it's all political. I think that's where we've in my opinion, that's where we've gotten as a society is everything has to have an agenda, everything. Civil discourse is out the window, facts don't matter.
Hmm.
It just that's what it feels like to me, and that's what I have encountered on a regular basis. Now I do meet people I mean, I call them, and many people call them, the movable middle or the persuadable middle, where they really authentically do care about facts. I think that's becoming less and less prevalent. I recently friended someone who I just thought by her lifestyle and by some of the things that she said was a Marxist. A lot of people are Marxist. They don't even know it just because the culture just has shifted so much. Like yeah, they don't even know what Marxism is. But I was talking to her and she's like, "Yeah, I'm going to vote for the Libertarian candidate." I was like, "Really?" She's like, "Yeah, and my gay friends, they're all going to vote for the Libertarian candidate for president this year." I'm like, "Why?" They're like, "Well, because we know Joe Biden's a creep and we normally would, vote Democratic, but he's had all these assault charges leveraged against him. He said all these racist things. So we just feel like the Libertarian candidate's, the best bet." And that shocked the crap
Yep.
out of me. I was like, "What? You're gonna vote for Joe Jorgensen? What?" And they had, like, really good reasons why. Now they still kind of buy into, like, or she in particular buys into, like, cultural appropriation and a few other things. But, like, when I sat down and had a meal with her, and I was telling her a little bit more about what I do for a living, and she's like, "That's fantastic." And I'm like, "Really?" Because I was honest with her about my views, and she's like, "Yeah, it makes total sense." And I kind of broke down in a very simplistic terms, like free market economics and difference between, capitalism. I never use that term anyway, because Marx is the one that defined it. So I don't like to use Marxist terms to define my beliefs because it's so skewed. But I explained the free market in very simplistic terms. I explained what Marxism was in very simplistic terms. She's like, "You're absolutely right. The free market is king. That's the way to go." And so with people like her who are kind of a blank slate, in a sense, like, where she still is able to think for herself and she's not bought in one way or the other. If you explain things in terms that they understand, and this is a key thing to organizing, really,
Oh
is
yeah.
you go after the people in the movable middle and you really focus on terminology that they'll understand. And that's been a huge problem in the liberty movement too, and in people like you and I who have a lot of knowledge and think in a specific way. Not that you have this problem or anything, but people like you and me, we talk about these things in our language. We don't really think about the person across from us and use language that makes sense for
That's
them,
that's right.
and that's a key thing to organizing. And that really, like, I realized that pretty quickly, especially being a part of clergy in my faith, is, Paul says to the baker, I'm paraphrasing here, but let's do that. To the baker, I'm a baker. To the welder, I'm a welder. I'm making up job titles, but essentially he said that, like, you have to speak their language.
Right.
You have to
That's
be
right.
able to relate with them. And that's something that the Marxist movement has done great at. They've been able to message to people that never in a million years, if you said, "Oh, this is Marxism," they would never agree with it. But anyway, I'm kind of going on down a rabbit hole, but
No,
um,
good.
I do think that there is still kind of an opportunity to kind of persuade people over to our side, people that are in the persuadable middle, movable middle. But we have to be really, really good at getting our language right, not to trick them, but just to
Right.
give them mental models that they can
Right.
relate to, so
That's
they
right.
can
Now,
understand it, right?
as a physician, I run into all kinds of people, and it's like that's one of the first things I do. What do you do? And then
Yeah.
I make analogs to, or to metaphors that relate to their professional interest and their construction of how they look at the world. Because it's like, here's what's going on with the body. Because nobody has studies physiology. That's not happening.
Right.
And it's like,
Yeah.
okay, you don't want, and I could talk to you, and it would just snow you. You wouldn't want to be the party to the conversation, and it
Right.
wouldn't be meaningful interaction. So it's like the trick is to make it so that you understand what I'm trying to tell you, and we don't have to agree. But it's like
Mm,
in the end, I want to make sure you understand where I'm coming from with regard to how this all fits together.
yeah.
So it's to create meaning within their life that makes sense to them, so that they can understand what it is and why it is that you are advocating for the position you're advocating for.
Absolutely. I mean, even people that I know that are Marxists, and they'll say that they're Marxists or some kind of equivalent, right? But I still see them sometimes as an opportunity if they don't understand what they're espousing, because they don't understand it well enough to where if I come in with language that they could understand, they, they would still be so bought into that false understanding that they just wouldn't move. Um, so, like, for someone who really cares about equality, let's talk about equality then. Let's talk about healthcare and how you don't have equal access to healthcare because of the government. And look at what all these one percenters are doing to prevent you from having healthcare. And then I define what a one percenter is as a politician or whatever. Bernie Sanders definitely a one percenter, right? Um, and I'm able to explain healthcare from that perspective because they're thinking one percenter, the elite. Okay, let's define that. Let's define it as the government. Let's look at what they're using their power for to prevent people, and it just you just go down the rabbit hole.
Yeah, and it's like that. It's interesting because it's like I look at it like this. It's like there's a book that I have yet to read called Simulacra and Simulation. Okay, and
Hmm.
it's like simulacra is like to create a it's like the system functions in a manner that is not like what it claims to function as. That's my understanding of it, which is like so the say the I was studying this like so I look out the window and I talk to everybody looks around and they see just misery out here. Is look out the window, you see misery, and it's like what is going on here? And I used to believe nobody has any money, right? And it's like, why is that? And it's like the basic preconception is that the elite are sucking up all the money to get the money because they want the money. And I'm like, you know what? I think that's not correct. They don't even need the money. They don't
Yeah.
want the money. They don't need the money. And all they want to do is make sure you have none so that when they sprinkle it out there, you'll go running around after it. Like, you see the mule with the carrot dangling in front of him,
Yeah.
right? That's
Yeah.
it. It's like, the purpose is to cause you to be sensitive to when they sprinkle it on the in front of you.
Right. Right. Yeah. I mean, money always helps, but I agree with you that ultimately it's power. And it kind of reminds me. Do you ever watch not Game of Thrones? Although that's a very good political one too. House of Cards.
I never did watch that one.
Kevin Spacey. Oh,
I'm
the
not
battle
some you
of
watcher. I'm
man.
just like this. I'm like,
Oh, it's really good, especially like the first 2 or 3 seasons. I mean,
mm,
Kevin Spacey, he's awful, but he's a very good actor in this series. Anyway, his character, Frank Underwood, um, he's a politician. He's a Democratic politician. He's a corrupt AF, like terrible, evil, corrupt politician. And one of the things that he's constantly breaking the fourth wall, and he's like explaining politics to us as
wait,
a
what's the
politician.
fourth wall?
The fourth wall, it's like when you look into the camera and you're talking to the audience,
Okay, I
right?
got you. I never heard of that. Okay, I'm good.
Oh,
I'm
you've never
it's
heard
like
of
it
it?
was a
Oh, yeah.
video like a reference to stagecraft.
Yeah, yeah, it is a reference to stagecraft. It's when, most movies, they never acknowledge the audience, but he will look directly at you and like
Oh,
start talking to you. And one of the things that he says, I think this is in the very first episode of the entire show, is people are fools for money. Like I can get anyone to do anything for money, and they're absolute fools. That's all I need to know about them. Money you can lose, you can get, but power, you cannot just like lose power and then just get more. Like power just doesn't hang off, don't
hmm
doesn't hang off of trees. And it kind of reminds me of that quote. He has a lot of like good quotes about power and
yeah.
politics and different things. They're just brilliant. Highly recommend for you to at least watch the first episode of the first season. And if you're not hooked, then okay. But anyway, sorry, another
No, it's
tangent.
quite interesting because it's like the issue is this is I always amazed at how cheap people are. Throw
Mhm.
a little bit of money. It's like, what are you kidding me? You're doing that for that's just crazyville. You know what I mean? Like people
Yeah,
are nuts, man. It's like, wow.
like that's your price. That's how much your character is worth. Oh, 100%. 100. I mean, people do it
Funny.
not even for money. Like I had when I was working for Americans for Prosperity AFP, there was this one guy, and I did report him. Just to make his door knocking numbers look better, he would like cheat on the numbers and say, "Oh, this person was here when they weren't." Would I mean, just would basically just cheat on the numbers just to make his numbers look good. Not even because he needed it to do his job, but just so that he would just look better than the other field directors. He was willing to compromise data for an entire organization in order just to look better. And it's like, really, that's what does it for you. Like that's how much it takes. That's how little it takes for you to compromise your virtue. It's baffling to me. Absolutely.
All the
Anyway.
humanity. right?
All the humanity. Sure.
It is. It's just it's a fascinating thing. It's like you study the ancient texts and you're like this. That nothing has changed.
Oh, no,
The
it's
human. It's like this. It's like the surface looks different. It's like different foam on top, different waves. But at the surface, underneath this, the same motivational structures of humanity hasn't changed in written history. That's just like
yeah,
and it's like all those motivations, nothing different. And it's
no.
just so it's like this recombination of these subsurface effects and control the surface is all that's happening here, which is
Yeah,
like
yeah.
utterly fascinating to me. I'm like, so it is. So the trick is to create human systems for human interaction and relate to each other in a more positive fashion, right?
Yeah. I also think too, that's one of the reasons why the free market works so well is because it works with human nature, not against human nature, right? If you look at the free market, it's all about incentives. It's all about people pursuing their own self-interest, right? It doesn't work against human nature because we know human nature is not perfect. And that's why Marxism doesn't work. It's not, oh, we just hate Marxism for the sake of Marxism. No, it's because it just doesn't work doesn't work at all. It goes against human nature. It will never work no matter how many times it's tried, no matter how many forms it takes or what you call it. It's not going to work. And I think that's the one of the key things that I've taken away from my study of economics and politics is that you need systems regardless of industry that works with human nature.
That's right. Positively aligned intentionality of the players. All the players have this similar interests that makes the whole system positively charged. And it's
Yeah.
like, so we have to point back at Cuba again. I read a book by a guy named Salvande Gonzalez, I believe is his name. And he's writing about the Cuban Revolution. And he said his basic thesis of this book was fascinating. He's a Cuban. He's like, the Cuban Revolution is a mock-up of the new world order to come by the
Mhm.
elite oligarch types. They want to generate a feudal system that enslaves the masses, and they get to go jet set around and save the world by
Yeah.
making everybody else slaves or serfs or something like that. I'm like,
Yeah.
there you go. So it's like that. I think that's kind of what it comes down to. We're at this point, which is like, I had a conversation with a friend of mine, and I told me I thought he was possessed, ideologically possessed. Okay, and it's
Oh,
like that was interesting because the next day the guy talked to me on the phone, and he was like this. He did this psychological thing that was quite utterly fascinating, and it put me on my heels because I didn't expect it to happen. But he's like this. He separated himself. He goes, I was going to tell you what I was thinking. So he takes himself out of the equation, and what he was thinking, he presents to me. And it was that the possessing spirit spoke to me straight. And it's like, it was awful. It was awful. And I'm like, oh, yeah. And it's like, it inspired in me like thoughts I don't want to have. And I'm like, okay, I hope I don't see him anytime soon at all, ever. In fact, I
wow.
would be happy. But it's like, it's like, what's the significance of it? It's like this nihilism and
Hmm.
right, and it's like there's a guy named, you might be aware of him, E. Michael Jones. Okay, so E. Michael Jones is a Catholic who's a copious writer, professor of English literature, English, and he got fired from St. Mary's College in Indiana for being anti. So St. Mary's is a Catholic university
Oh,
or
yeah.
college. He got fired for being after 1 year. He got fired for being, at least this is his opinion, fired for being anti-abortion in a Catholic school in 1980. And
Really?
so then he started creating a magazine called Culture Wars Magazine.
Uh-huh.
And he wrote, like, I read 4,000 pages that he wrote in last year. And I have 1,000-page book in my book box, right? And it's in a box right now, but it's 1,000-page book. I mean, he writes as fast as I can read and then some. It's fascinating. And so it's like, but he writes Culture Wars, and it's like, so I had a couple chats with him online, and I'm like, Michael, how'd you get here? Because we're in the same place. And I got here by trying to figure out what happened to America. He goes, I got here by trying to figure out what happened to the Catholic Church. And I'm like, same answer. It's the same
And
answer.
yeah,
Culture wars. He would call it culture wars. There's a guy named Yuri Bezmenov. You probably heard of him. Yuri
actually, I have.
Bezmenov. He's a KGB agent that defected in 1970 to Canada because he couldn't stand the Russian communists because he was one of them. He was a KGB
Yeah.
agent in India, and he
Oh,
couldn't stand their ethics. And he's like, he talks about demoralization. He
Mm.
was lecturing in the early 1980s, and you can find his YouTubes very readily. And
Oh
it's
wow.
like demoralization, and then the purpose is to create a revolution and a new governmental system, post-revolutionary new normal, right?
Yeah. Oh yeah. Of course.
And so it's like this. So he described the system. I'm like, oh, it's all very fascinating. But what's the significance of it? It's like, well, here we are. It's like culture wars. It's like the trick to me is to create robust people who are able to use their own brains and can understand whether or not their interests are being served by whatever is happening around them. One of the things that Bezmenov said was this. He goes, if you properly demoralized person cannot tell their own self-interest,
Yeah.
okay? Because it's like this. He goes, you can bring them color or black and white glossy pictures and they will not recognize the evidence as evidence. They will have a reason to dismiss it. And that
Well.
Michael Jones would talk about it like this. He calls it libido dominandi, which is like your passions govern you.
Yeah.
Okay. So it's like there's a guy named David, what's his name? Shoot. Livingstone. And he's a black Muslim in Canada. Montreal is where he lives. And he's a wild man. Like he quit college and he's like, I'll just educate myself. And now he writes books and he writes pretty interesting books. And it's like, but they're wild. And Livingstone basically taught me this. He goes, here's the Babylonian control system, okay? So there's magi and there's sorcerers. And they all use magic to control the events inside the society. So the magi are good magic users who do good things for good people and prevent bad things from happening to good people. They're the wise men of the East in the nativity story, right? They
Right.
bring the
You
bride, the
said magi.
frankincense, myrrh, and gold.
Yeah.
Those are the good guys. Okay, so they're the good guys, but there's their shadow side in Babylon is the sorcerers, and the sorcerer's job. Here's how Livingstone describes. And it may be Livingstone, but it's so close that I can't distinguish between the two. With all apologies, sir. Right?
Yeah.
It goes like this: the sorcerer's job is to summon demons and to control them through their superior knowledge of evil, which is
Mm.
like, well, what does that mean, right? It's like that's like ancient speak for something that's really happening in a socio psychological sense, right? Or
Mhm.
psychosocial function. So here's my interpretation: is that summoning demons is to inflame the passions of the crowd, so they're a mob,
Mhm.
right? And then to control it through your superior knowledge of evil is to make sure you don't get burned because you're setting a big fire in your society. And
Mhm.
they're supposed to go do something that's useful to you if you're the sorcerer, right?
Yeah, yeah. I
And
mean,
so,
that's just how organizing works. I mean, it's
hmm,
going back to the, demoralization that you talked about. I mean, so I'm Jewish, and the, enemy number one, non-spiritual, but in some cases spiritual, enemy of Jews has been the government. Like, you look at governments all throughout history and the horrible things they would do to Jews. So why that's relevant is there's a lot of Jewish organizations here in America. I was a part of one. I was trained by one, progressive, and they would advocate for things that's like, why would you do that? Well, because we're Jews and we care about equality and justice. Okay, but that's not that. Like, you're falling for a freaking trap, but you're so brainwashed or demoralized that you don't even see it when it's in front of your face. Um, I recently posted on social media about how I will never vote for Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, and here's why. For CJR reasons and racism reasons, and Biden's got so many sexual assault allegations leveraged against him. And I had one of my friends from this progressive Jewish organization say, I'm so disappointed in you. As white Jews, we have a responsibility with the power that we have of being white to like advocate for the least among us. And I'm like, well, then why in the world would you support Biden? Like, he's clearly racist. He's clearly anti-woman. He, the policy that he advocates for would not help minorities. In fact, he's one of the key architects of our current CJR system, which promotes police brutality. So why, and Kamala Harris has thrown so many Black people, innocent Black people, into prison. Like, she built her career on it. So why the hell, pardon my French, but why the hell would you ever vote for him? It's like they're so brainwashed. They can't see what's right in their face. And I really believe that's part of the reason why people are so partisan. Like, they're so riled up by the media and by their parties against each other. They
Hmm.
can't even think logically. I mean,
Hmm.
I consider myself pretty open-minded. And even for me, having grown up the way that I did, it was a really uncomfortable process to come to the realizations that I had, which are completely independent of the different parties. And it took me actually living under communism for an entire year to get to the point where I cared more about the values and the issues than I cared about the talking points and the inflammatory, like, mind
This,
control.
this will be the libido dominandi thing, okay?
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
like the educational process is designed to generate attachment of emotional value to the symbols that can then be put in front of you by the media presentation by the sorcerer to stimulate you to have some emotional function. So you see it in 1984, the 5-minute hate, right?
Mhm,
And it's
mhm.
like this. So it's like to generate. We don't want them thinking rationally. We want
Right.
them to be controllable, malleable people. Is what
Mhm.
they're after. And it's like, at least in the aggregate sense, it's like to control the population because it's like that's how you stay in charge,
Yeah, yeah.
right? Because
Yeah,
I'm
that's
like, I'm not interested in anybody staying in charge. So that makes me automatically a bad sheep, right? And it's like
yeah,
I'm like Western civilization. I'm like Western civilization. There's a V.I. Lenin, so that's Vladimir Ilyich Lenin. He, he's Lenin of the communist revolution in Russia. For
mhm.
people, some of the people they don't talk about it in the history class anymore. I don't think
Yeah. They
Bolshevik
also don't
Bolshevik revolution.
yeah, they also don't wanna talk about how he spent most of his time in France and he was educated on Marxism in France. They don't ever wanna make that connection. Same thing with Pol Pot. Same thing with a lot of these, terrorists or these, tyrants. They were all I'm sorry, like, I could just yeah,
Well, no, so
anyway.
it's interesting. So Lenin said this thing that was useful in my mind, which is the best way to control the opposition is to lead the opposition.
Mhm.
So what you do is you have a bunch of people who are true believers, right? They're true believers, emotionally driven, and they're motivated. But you make sure you have a cynical mercenary in charge that is leading them, and you promote that one with money. And it
Mhm.
doesn't matter if they believe. That way, you get the crowd to do what you want them to do. That's
Mhm.
that's Lenin leading the opposition so that they always will fail or win. And it's like, so I talked to a nice young German fellow. This was interesting. So he was a programmer that I hired maybe 8 years ago to do some telemedicine stuff with. And
Okay.
I said, this time frame. He lives in California now, and I said, this looks like um, about 1920s Germany, like Weimar Germany. So in Weimar
Okay.
Germany, there's the communists and there's the Nazis, and they're fighting in the streets. And here's the trick: doesn't matter who wins, because
Yeah.
in the end, both sides are controlled by the moneyed interest. And
Mhm.
so it's like whoever wins, the seat falls in the hands of the money, and it doesn't matter who wins.
Yeah.
Okay.
Sounds familiar.
Well, it's like this. It's like, well, so that's the game, and it has been the game probably for thousands of years. Right? And I
Mhm.
call this the ownership. And I study Hebrew oddly in the last 1 year, about 1 year now. And
Oh,
I'm
wow.
doing what happened to America, and I'm like studying Hebrew. I'm like, it can't comes down to Hebrew. I'm like, you must be kidding me. Right? In a million years, I'm reading Aramaic. I'm like, right, because Aramaic is a precursor to Hebrew, right? It's the same letters. And I'm like, just I became interested, which is like, okay, the question became this. So, okay, look, so there's two images of the bush in the Bible that I'm aware of. And there's that bush that Abraham's ram got caught in that allowed
Mhm.
him to distinguish the good God, right? And then
Mhm.
there's the burning bush, which is actually a cell phone that talks to God directly.
Right.
And I'm like, this bush thing, this bush is a literary symbol of high import because it's like it's the direct intervention of God in the affairs of man. It's like, maybe I should spend a little bit of time thinking about this. So I said, how do you spell it in Hebrew? which really meant Aramaic, right?
Right,
It's
right.
spelled Shin Yod Tov, okay? And I'm like, how do you say that? Shit. I'm like, you must be kidding me. I'm laughing, right?
Oh, that's
And
so
wait,
funny.
wait. So then I'm reading this Hebrew translator. I'm using a Hebrew translator, and then I'm like this: translate it back into English from the Hebrew, right?
Mhm,
And it
mhm.
means bush, thicket, and it also means discourse. And that just about knocked me off my chair.
Mm,
Okay.
yeah.
And so I'm like this. So I'm studying what's going on here. And it said it in the first word of the Bible. The first word of the Bible is brashit, right?
Okay, yeah.
Okay. So vada is to make, shit, discourse. Okay.
Right.
So it's like this. What is going on is you're separate from the part of reality that you called not you, and you're interacting with it in a generative fashion, which is the discourse.
Mhm.
And so you're generating your reality. I'm like, that says everything right there. How about that? And I'm like,
Wow.
it made me understand. Like I say, it's ridiculous, but I was studying it, and it was like it made me understand how I understand how the Babylonians were organizing their society, and it's
Mhm.
like what's going on with people psychologically and then sociologically. So the issue is to line up their intentionalities so that we're all positively intentioned. I think that's the most important element of all of it. Is like when we work together, we align our interests truly, our intentionalities are properly aligned, and no one's playing crooked. Because if you
Yeah,
do
yeah.
that, there's going to be some bad things happening, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And so it's like this: be just straight up, square with each other, and then positively intentioned, and then we can generate. If we're speaking true, we have to speak true to one another, and then we can generate a positive field that will protect and repel things that are no good and attract things that are positive, right?
Yeah.
That's all. And it's like, that's easy enough. How about that? The hardest part though is like this, it's like this, it's like self-deception, right? Because
Mm.
there's like so the person, my friend or former friend who was attached to this possessing entity, which I call a spirit of ownership, okay?
Mm.
It's almost impossible to distinguish that from yourself and your own thinking. It's like it's as smart as you are and can access all the faculties that you have access to and does not want to be expelled, right?
Right.
And
Mhm.
so it will deceive you and lie to you and tell you stories about yourself that are negative. And I kind of look at this as I've been studying psychology for a year, psychotherapy for a year, I guess. I don't know. The issue is this: I call neurosis is this premise is having negative thoughts and doing things to negate the negative thoughts. Does that make
Mm.
sense? So it's like to ward off the negative thing, you're doing things. It's like I'm OCD because I wash my hands to prevent the bad thing from happening, right? Oh
I'm
no. Oh
I'm
no.
actually that way.
I've
Yep.
got you. Sorry.
I am very Oh, no, 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 no,
Yeah.
no. I feel I know I have a problem. I know I'm OCD and not just about hand washing. But anyway, please
No, it
please
goes like
continue.
this. So it's
This
like
is
this.
fascinating.
This is fascinating. So I was driving down the road. I live in a rural town in Arizona, and I live down
Mhm.
a country road, and people drive a little bit too fast, and there's too many bunnies, and that so you always get some dumb bunny's going to get turned into pulverized smash. You know what I mean? It's rough, and it's like this. So it's like I'm living on this road, driving home on a nice sunny day. It's always sunny here, mostly very rarely got
Yeah, yeah.
overcast, and it's like um smashed bunny, and it's like I'm like getting upset by this for too long. Like this 20 minutes, I'm like still upset. I'm like, wow, this is getting out of hand. And what am I going to do? So every time I see the smashed bunny, I say the Lord's Prayer. Okay. And
Mhm.
it's like this because I'm like, God, what am I going to do? How am I going to not be so upset? Because this is not. It's like going down this neurotic pathway, right?
Yeah.
Bambi did. No, it's not. But it's Thumper. He didn't do anything wrong, man. He's an innocent victim of automotive transportation, and
Yeah.
you know what I mean. And
Yeah.
so there's always going to be another one because they keep on generating more bunnies very rapidly, and there's more cars, and there's just never going to stop. So I'm like, I start saying the Lord's Prayer. It made my mind stop doing it, and I'm like, wow, that's interesting. So this is my cure for OCD. All these because it's like I study people with neurosis, and I started prescribing it maybe a dozen years ago. And it
Yeah.
goes like this: is like so the typical neurotic person would be something like this. Is like, okay, so when you lay awake and you can't go to sleep, and you just can't stop thinking, okay,
Mhm.
that you're not really thinking. You just think you're thinking. And it's
Right.
like, wait, I heard myself say that to a patient. I'm like, this is the most ridiculous nonsense I've ever heard. Right. And I'm like, but it's very informative because it goes like this. It's like you're being possessed by your thoughts. When look, it's because your will is dependent on your thoughts, as opposed to your thoughts are dependent on your will. So what
Mhm.
this does is when you say the Lord's Prayer, because it's just rote memorization, you're just doing this thing, you're making your mind. You ever see them train a horse in a round pen?
No.
Okay, so a round pen is a giant round pen. That's why they call it a round pen.
Right,
Okay,
right.
the cowboy invites the horse in. The most important thing the cowboy has to do is to establish the intention to dominate the horse's behavior with his will.
Mhm.
Because cowboy walks around the center of the circle in a tiny little circle and has a long rope that goes to the bridle of the horse, to the nose of the horse, and he carries around a big whip. And the horse trots around the edge. He's doing this giant circle. And then when
Right.
the cowboy wants him to turn around, he steps to the side, and the horse is like, wow, he's in front of me. Oh, and he turns around. That guy's so fast because I'm. So the
Yeah.
horse is doing these big circles, and the cowboy will turn him around, and he just does that until he's satisfied with training the horse. Then he lets him go. Now, if the
Mhm.
cowboy doesn't establish the intention to dominate the thinking of the horse or the behavior of the horse with his will, the horse is going to kick him in the head, jump over the fence, and chase a mare because hanging out with the cowboy is not as fun, right?
Right, right.
So
Sure.
I tell the patient, I'm like, this is like when you think you're thinking and you're not sleeping and you think you're thinking, that's you get kicked in the head by your mind because you're being possessed by your thoughts, right?
Right. Yeah.
And so it's
Yeah,
like
that
this.
makes
So you
sense.
say the Lord's Prayer, and what that does is that makes the mind go through rote memorization because it's like it's fixed pathway and it's under willful control because you do it until it's right and then you let it go. And when it acts up again, you do it again, right? And it's
Yeah,
like
yeah.
this causes this to get under control. So you
Redirection.
practice this. If you're doing the OCD thing, right? You're like, yeah, that's not me that said that. Then you say the Lord's Prayer to make you calm down, wind it down, see if it works. And it's
Yeah.
like this. I tell everybody the same thing. I'm like, look, Mary had a little and it might work. Okay, I don't know. It hasn't been tested. And it's not ethical for me to test it because I have one that works.
Yeah.
So I'm like, I won't test it. And it's
Right.
like, okay. And it's like, I got an atheist to do it. And she taught me a lot by doing it because she's like, I don't believe that. I said, it doesn't matter what you believe.
Yeah, yeah.
It's just
Yeah.
make your mind go through these paces and it will work. I guarantee it.
Yeah, it's, redirection.
No, that's what she
Oh,
said. It's not redirection.
it's
It is
not?
not. It is not redirection. It is.
Okay.
It is. It is training your mind to do as you will,
Okay.
because your mind is to be a tool for you. So the Hindus talk about the mind like it's a horse. That's what
Mhm.
she said, and I'm like, well, no, 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 no. That's where the intentionality comes in, and it made me understand that part of it. Because if you think it's redirection, it's just throw a shiny thing and go, oh, squirrel, right?
Mhm.
That's not right.
Right.
Because the issue is no, it's make your mind behave appropriately per your will, and then you let them go, and it gets your mind used to be. It's the same as the horse. You're training the horse. The Hindus talk about the mind like it's a horse for 5,000 years. Okay, and
Yeah.
they said if you follow your mind, you're going to get tired and dirty.
Mhm.
Which is
Yeah.
that's what neurosis is. That's the neurotic behavior because it's like okay, you're just chasing around, and it's like you're washing your hands and the skin is falling off because it hurts too dried out. It's like awful.
Yeah.
So it's like that. I tell everybody the same thing. I said you probably practice for 90 days. It will take to get your mind used to being under relaxing and doing as your will tells it to do, as opposed to allowing it to run around and kick you.
I'll have to try that. I know, like, what has worked for me quite often has been, especially, like, when I'm laying down at night trying to sleep, is, meditation. To where I will just, like, focus on my nose or
Uh-huh.
just focus on God, like the name of God. And I'll just like repeat it over and over and over and over and over and over again. And then it's like I'll like calm down, I'll like level out. That's really worked for me. I'll try the Lord's Prayer though. That could be
It's just
interesting.
a thought, and it's like, well, what does that mean? I don't claim it to be the end all of all outcomes. You
Oh,
know what I mean?
sure.
It's just a prescription. It's like okay,
Sure,
but it's a
sure.
thought, and it's like, well, ultimately, it comes down to this: we to be most effective, we have to have our minds, our faculties in order, and not behaving by um, reflex, right? like we get stimulated and our emotionality takes over, and then we're not using the higher faculties to achieve our ends.
Right.
But it's like that. So it's like I don't know. I'm trying to figure out this. It is this social space that you're working in is very similar to the social space I'm intent upon working, but I'm not there yet. I'm moving up from this professionalism, professional opportunity, like business, and
Mhm.
then turn it into this working inside this social sphere where you're working right now. It's like it's very complex and it's difficult
Yeah.
because everybody there's so many in this space that you're working is like, you know, everybody needs jobs and everybody's worried about healthcare and they got their family and it's very tough, man. It's like it's so
Yeah.
many competing elements. It's kind of like it seems like you have to I think the big thing is the construct I see is it's relational value between people, right?
Yeah, it really is all about relationships, any kind of organizing. And I tell people if you want to understand organizing, read the Bible, especially the New Testament, because that's all you're being taught is organize. I mean, you're being taught more than that. Like you're being taught. So I'm a Messianic Jew. I don't know if you know what Messianic Judaism is. Basically, we're the ones that do believe that the prophecy has been fulfilled, that Yeshua was the Messiah. So I do read the New Testament. And hey, baby, sorry, my dog is being needy. So, I mean, Paul was a brilliant organizer. Jesus was God is a brilliant organizer. And really it's so necessary because they were like the least popular people on the face of the planet. Like the Jews didn't want anything to do with them. Nobody really wanted anything to do with them at all. The Jews wouldn't believe it, even though they were Jews, and obviously the prophecy was fulfilled. Anyway, it's very, very, very fascinating. But there's also like aside from the New Testament, there are lessons we can learn about organizing in the New Testament. There is a book called Rules for Radicals. If you haven't heard of it, if you haven't read it, please read it. There's also a book called, in fact, I might have it. I do actually right up here. Um, it's called Leadership and Dedication. I think it's backwards because I'm on video, but
No, it's
um,
not. It's not. It's
no,
dedication
it's
to leadership.
Oh, Dedication and Leadership, I'm sorry. And it's by Douglas Hyde. Now, Douglas Hyde, um, he was a top communist leader. He was British and he was recruited and he became one of their top leaders. And he ended up converting to Catholicism.
Huh.
And then he wrote this book so that the Catholics could understand the tactics of communists and why they were so successful despite their rhetoric and their values leading to poverty and death and destruction. Like, how would you get people to buy into this? And so it's a fascinating book. I highly recommend both of those books if you're interested in entering into this. But also, like Paul's tactics are very, very good. Jesus's tactics are very, very good. In fact, Saul Alinsky calls Paul the greatest community organizer of all time. Um, so it's fascinating. You can find a lot of Alinsky, videos, what little that there is left on YouTube. And then there's a lot of more modern community organizing books, but they're all pretty much variations of Rules for Radicals, etc. It's very, very good. And there's also a book that you might find fascinating. It's called Leadership and Self Deception. It's
Oh yeah,
by
I've got that one.
You have that one at the Arbinger Institute. Great
Yep.
stuff.
They
Uh,
do great work.
yeah, that those books taught me so much. But yeah, if I had to recommend anything for you as you're learning more about the organizing space and that industry, I would highly recommend those books.
So here's a question. I'll ask you this kind of in closing. Okay, this is like,
Great.
what project are you working on at the moment that is of interest to the people that will be listening to us here?
So I do work full time for AF, America's Future Foundation, and I'm not representing America's Future. Just FYI, as a disclaimer, I'm representing myself, Rachel Toombs. But we are in my professional capacity. I am working on a national membership through the America Future Foundation. It's for millennials and Gen Zers. We don't have anything like it in the liberty movement space right now, but it's meant to support and encourage and empower those who believe in liberty to live a liberty lifestyle and to be effective wherever they are, especially at the local level, whether that's transforming any of the five key institutions that we recognize, which is government, business, community, media, and education. Um, so that's all very important. One of the things that we're really passionate about is really plugging that gap in the liberty movement where we're actually shifting culture. I don't know if you've heard of the Overton window.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, so that's what we want to do because there's really no organizations, especially organizations that are focused on millennial and Gen Z in the liberty movement that are purely focused on shifting culture. Now you look, I've done a ton of Oppo research, tons and tons of Oppo research, and there's a I won't say millions, but it seems like there's millions of organizations like this in the Marxist movement. We've fallen behind. So we really want to encourage people through this membership to get active based on their passion on the local level, not even politically, but just shift the culture, excuse me, no matter what institution interests you. Um, so yeah, we're doing
How
that.
would they contact you and your organization then?
Yeah, so if you're interested in learning more about my organization, where I work, and or just me to ask more questions, you can email me at Rachel, spelled Rhachel, at americasfuture.org, or RHENSONTOOMBS at gmail.com.
Wonderful. Thank you for coming out and enjoy a little lively little conversation with me.
Yeah, ditto. I had a blast. Thank you for having me.
Very good. We'll catch up to each other later, I hope.
That sounds great. Thank you so much, Bradley. I really appreciate being here and being able to talk with you.
Well, you
Thanks.
very much too, Rachel. You take care now.
Thanks. You too. See you next time.
Bye-bye. I hope you enjoyed this episode of The Best Medicine Podcast with Bradley H. Werrell, DO. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe below, either over there or over there. Also, if you're interested in a medical consultation with myself, there's also information below.